thank you all for coming. The Program for Instructional Effectiveness offers a variety of professional development opportunities, including workshops, lectures, and book discussion groups. Our next event after today's is scheduled for Wednesday, October 12th from 1 to 2:30. We will be holding the session in person, the first in-person event we've done in quite a while. It's going to be in Rendezvous 213, and we will be broadcasting it as well. That information will show up fairly soon on the PI website. And Spencer Jardine will discuss strategies for finding OER. But today, I'm really excited to welcome you to our Great Ideas in Teaching series and introduce Nancy Devine, who will give a presentation titled Using Student Polling to Engage in Direct Classroom Learning. Nancy is an associate professor in the Department of Physical and Occupational Therapy. She has clinical experience in acute care, inpatient, outpatient neurologic rehabilitation, and hospice. And her areas of research include neurological rehabilitation interventions, motor learning interventions, neuroplasticity and recovery of function, and virtual augmented reality interventions to improve motor recovery and reduce chronic pain. She holds a Doctor of Physical Therapy degree from the MGH Institute of Health Professions, a PhD in experimental psychology, and an MS in biology from ISU, and a BS in physical therapy from the University of Vermont. This past spring, Nancy was recognized as ISU's Distinguished Teacher for 21-22. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Nancy, and she will begin her presentation. And I just want to let people know there will be plenty of time at the end for questions and discussion. And if you haven't already silenced or muted your microphone, please take a moment to do so now. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for joining me today for this. And I am a fairly informal speaker, so at any time feel free to unmute and ask a question or to contribute a comment. You may also use the chat. I do have it open, and hopefully I'll glance over there. And I apologize in advance that most likely I'll be looking at Zoom and at the presentation instead of directly into the camera. But so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. When I was asked to do this, I was thinking through what I never thought I'd be in this position to try to assist somebody else in teaching. I thought, what would I use? And so I used something that I think dramatically changed how I taught in the amount of time that I've been here at ISU. So I thought I'd talk about student polling and how I use it to change classroom dynamics, as well as to adjust my plan for that day of what I thought we were going to cover. To be able to ensure that learning occurs while we're actually in the classroom and not just in between. So I'm going to repeat a little bit of that introduction as a setup kind of why I don't necessarily have a huge amount of confidence in talking about teaching. But yes, I'm Nancy Devine with a degree in physical therapy, and that's a very strong part of my identity. I am such a physical therapist. But I also have degrees in biology, neuroanatomy, and experimental psychology. And what an ideal, remarkable life path that was all unplanned, that just opportunistically presented itself, and I was able to take advantage of it. I joined ISU in 1990, so it's been a while. I've been teaching for a while, and yet I don't feel like I fully understand teaching yet. I thought this Scrabble board of the different pieces and parts as letters kind of depicts in some ways what I've been able to cobble together to try to further enhance my teaching abilities. And over those years, the resources I've used are PI, and certainly the Center for Teaching and Learning before that. My colleagues, I learned so much from other people who teach. I learn a lot from my students about teaching, and students have changed a lot in the time that I've been here at Idaho State. So it's an ongoing process. And then I have been an ongoing student all along. I have those degrees, but I've also taken a lot of things such as 2 years of Latin and tree identification and poetry and creative writing, all sorts of things. And it's remarkable every time you have that opportunity to be on the student side, even using things like our learning management system like Moodle, it teaches you a lot about what their view really is versus what you think you've set up as an instructor. And then last but not least, a huge amount of trial and error. So you can see with my degrees, I do not have a degree in education. I think I've taken one course way back in 1991 or 92 that was literally titled How to Teach at the Collegiate Level. Fabulous way to start. It was within, my early time at ISU, very helpful. But I think teaching is a challenge. I don't have the formal preparation to do it. It's interesting that universities allow people with other types of expertise to come in and teach at this level. And so using these resources is fantastic. And I still personally feel I have more to learn than what I've learned along the way. So again, what I thought is, when thinking about teaching, when I was asked to provide this, what produced the most dramatic change in my teaching? And I would say it was the use of polling. So what I'd like to go over today is just to describe what polling is, and then talk about how you can use it to direct your teaching as well as to engage students. Provide a few options for polling platforms. I've personally only used one, except today I'm also going to use the Zoom polling option. I figure since we're talking about polling, I'm going to send you a few polls during this presentation as well, and I'll appreciate your participation. And then a summary of essentially how I use polling that puts that together. So first of all, what is student polling? So polling is a way to pose questions during a classroom, and students are able to provide individual responses. And early on in my teaching, before the polling technology was available, this is what it looked like. Oops, it just disappeared. This is what it looked like. People would raise their hands. I would ask a question, how many of you think this, right? And that's what we had available. And that was one way to try to engage and see what students thought, and to adjust. But on some of the more challenging, deep thinking questions, such in a PT component of what treatment decision would you make, right? I rapidly found that the whole cohort, who was together for 3 full years, or it's a 3-year program, would look to the smartest person in the room, and when their hand went up, everybody else's hand went up, right? There wasn't a whole lot of discourse when you used hand raising. It was the best we had at the time, but now I'm using polling to be able to replace that. So I'm able to poll, people provide a response, and then after everyone has polled, or when enough time has gone by, I can release the results. So this is an example of one of my PowerPoint slides in which we'd had a case, we had the decision that was made, and do you agree with what the PT did? So this is just an example. And you can see it's done close to a 50-50 with a few more yeses. And that result stimulates discussion. And I love the discussion. So it does require, the downside is it requires some kind of technology. And when it first came out, we had a student response device that each student had. And then we had a receiver that plugged into the computer, and it could be used on site. But now it has progressed to being an app. And so anyone with an internet access or cell phone access can be responding to the same poll no matter where they're located, and it populates in the same time frame into that PowerPoint slide. And our program happens to have sites here in Pocatello as well as in Meridian. So we have students attending through video technology in the same class, and their polling responses all come into the same PowerPoint slide, so everyone can participate. So that's what I'm calling student polling. There could be a formal name for it out there. I'm not really sure, but I call it polling, and have also used search terms as student response devices or student responses. With those, you can make them identified. So some faculty members can choose to know which students are answering and which ways they're answering. I have opted most of the time to be anonymous. So I'm not really looking to see who's answering what. I'm most interested in what the cohort is thinking and how we can use that to direct conversation and what they know. And this is actually what I do. You see this little question mark in the bottom right corner? That reminds me that the next thing is a polling question, so that I know when I'm going to change my slide that there it is. So Margaret, would you go ahead and launch the first poll?
33% said yes as a student, 44 yes as a teacher, and 37 no.
So fairly even distributed. So, and I just thought of this, whether somebody had used it as a student, because I was thinking of most of us as instructors, right? So this is a way where you can rapidly have information to assess the experience of your audience or your classroom, right? So thank you for participating in that poll and providing an example of what type of information, how it immediately provides something you can use. So one way I use polling is to literally direct what I'm going to teach that day. It helps me identify what the student's current knowledge is and understanding. And then if needed, I can review content that I thought they were well prepared for briefly before moving on to new, or we can move right into that new information. But it's very hard for new content to serve well when presented in a class if the students have a gap in their knowledge or their understanding. So this is an example of one of the slides I use for that, in which is the best way to explain something, and I provide a correct answer that they don't see until after we've discussed the results that are available there. That can also help students to recognize whether they're answering similarly to their peers or if they're answering some wild thing. But this allows a chance to revisit why there might be blood and air in the abdomen that produces shoulder pain. So a physical therapist might see somebody with shoulder pain and it's really not coming from the shoulder. And understanding why that could happen is one of the components that's helpful to know before we move on to any other information. So polling has literally changed the response they provide. I now put in slides that I know that will take me in one direction or another for that class time. And I have that flexibility built in that we're still going to address the objectives that need to be addressed that day. We're just going to do it in a different route. If that helps. It doesn't always add additional class time. I'm not always trying to go back and fill in an entire foundation that they should have been responsible for. It may also help students to recognize when they are clearly different than their peers, right? And if they are the only one, then they're more likely, hopefully, to start filling in those gaps in addition to learning this new information and maybe getting some help and seeking help outside of class as well. So I have something in the chat that says, what is your threshold for going down one route versus another? And I use about the 50%. So I'm not necessarily, it's not that scientific, and it probably also depends how important it is. If a large percentage of them, sometimes it's how I've phrased the question. So sometimes there's an error in my part, there was a misunderstanding or something. But yeah, if half the class is not understanding it, then I'm gonna try to fill that in before going further. But I don't have any data or evidence to support that use. And then there's another question, is there a polling function on Moodle? I have never looked to see if there's a polling function on Moodle. I do know that the system that we use can work asynchronously instead of being synchronous, but I have personally not tried that. So maybe when we get to the discussion at the end, we can see if anybody else has had that and they can fill that in. And it looks like somebody's already doing that. The choice activity in Moodle is an option for asking a single question. And I have relied on using PowerPoint, that integration of PowerPoint heavily, that's been helpful. But certainly trying to get an active learning environment, when do you have a slide up and when don't you, and does that interfere with learning? And then Sasha is also saying the feedback activity is an option for multiple questions. Okay, so it looks like that might be a good option. Because again, how you're doing the polling isn't as important as an opportunity that if you're interested in accessing this information, finding a way to implement it. I thought this was a good image of facts versus assumptions. Even after decades of teaching, I thought I knew what my students knew before entering my class and during my class because I know our curriculum and I know what I've taught. And I was so wrong, right? What I think they know versus what they do know. And then each cohort has different needs. It's amazing. So the fact versus the assumption, and check your assumptions. Anytime you have a chance to check your assumptions, revealed through polling was that variability between cohorts. Even if I've been teaching the same class literally 29 years, I'm teaching one class this semester for the 29th time, still trying to get it honed and figured out, right? But again, what was retained before they came in, what was retained in my class, it helps. So polling provided me with a way to rapidly discern what students know from what they need to know prior to attempting to build on that knowledge. And my impression has been that students appreciate that opportunity because it's in a non-threatening, non-judgmental way, and it's anonymous. So nobody knows who it is. And when they're in a group versus kind of on the trailing end of that group, it helps them with their own internal self-assessment in a very gentle way. So then I also use polling for student engagement during the class to try to get that discussion going. So doing that, I tend to pose opinion questions. So based upon the information provided, which of the following options would be the best choice for a PT to make? And this is an example of some choices, right? So opinion, and a lot of these, I do have cases, but any of these potentially could be acceptable if you have a rationale. So it's not the correct answer that I'm seeking. It is the ability to form an opinion and then discuss a rationale and then respectfully discuss it among the entire cohort to think what the merits of each option are. And any bit of information we don't have the whole thing. So everybody seems to have different priorities and different bits of content that they're making assumptions about that would influence it. So those opinion questions appears to engage students, and it takes 2 to 3 class periods before I see that benefit. And then quite a bit more time is spent on the discussion, which is Rich and I'm almost more in the background. So it even engages people who typically would not speak up. And the best word I could find is compelled, that even though they would prefer not to, they just feel like they have to say something because their perspective is different. And I do have a remarkable patient case in which usually 1 to 2 at the most out of the 48 students pick up on an incredibly salient point that everybody else misses, and they make these assumptions. And for once, they turn out to be right. So instead of everyone answering this, and there's these 2 people over there, all of a sudden they nailed it. And it's an experience that almost, to me, has the impact as if I had that patient in front of me and missed it, right? That it provides more of an impact than just reading about a case and seeing the outcome. Having thought about it, made a choice, and then getting the outcome gives you almost an experience without a patient, but darn close to it. So the polling results will show variability, and students initially expect that everyone's thinking the way they are. And it's a stunning thing when using polling with opinion questions, how that becomes part of the enrichment of the class of recognizing how diverse their opinions are. And again, some of them feel compelled that they just have to justify their choices even though they're different. And I do all of that before revealing what the actual outcome of the case is. And I emphasize the discussion and the rationales is where the most important learning is taking place. So again, during class, it stimulates student-driven discussion. I'm not posing, what do you think about this? They are. And it reveals their curiosity, what questions they have, what else they would have liked to have known. It reveals their current depth and breadth of knowledge as well as their experience. Many of them, for our program, you have to have some experience before coming in. Some of them have paid aid experience, some have been physical therapist assistants, so that all of those different attributes for each unique individual in the cohort ends up contributing to the entire class experience. And then the complex views of influences on the choices made. Why are people going with one thing versus another? And when is it experience and gut, and they can't even explain it versus formally thinking through it? So it kind of tests those boundaries and nudges people towards how they make, for me, clinical decisions. But I think it doesn't have to be a clinical decision. It could be anything. It could be political, it could be something about literature and opinions, right? It could be where opinion versus a right answer, where students can then practice how to articulate in a compelling manner and respectfully. So I get to listen, learn, and then adjust and tweak accordingly if they start going off on some other avenue. So we make sure we keep it respectful, and we keep it on the topics that we're doing. So polling provides me with a stimulus and a mechanism for targeted learning. So can we try another poll? So let's see what we've got. This is one of my favorite results. We've got a little bit of everything, right? Because that then opens it up. So would anyone like to share their opinions about, it doesn't have to be the one they selected, but do you have any thoughts or comments about any of the options available? And Spencer, I can see your hand raised.
Oh, I really enjoy this presentation. I've actually used polling a number of times, and I've begun using it again this semester. I kind of go in waves, and I've been using Poll Everywhere. One of the costs that I see is that it takes time, and sometimes I'm not the best at manipulating and using the technology in real time, and it seems like it does take up some time, but what would you say? Do you find that it takes a lot of time to do these, or like, because I think the way that Poll Everywhere works, you have to activate each separate question separately and so forth. But do you find that it takes a lot of time to administer and use these polls?
So I'm going to go ahead and say yes, right? I've been using these for quite a while now, and the technology is always changing, and certainly I have absolute fails. And so there are days we spend some time and it doesn't work. But overall, the value of what occurs within a classroom when I have it working has outweighed where I will continue to invest the time and the effort and the uncertainty, just like at the beginning of this Zoom. We had to figure out how the technology works, but we were successful, and now we have this opportunity to discuss, right? So what I have probably done is benefited from my department's willingness to spend the money for one that requires a fee, right? And then I use maybe 1% of what it can do. So I opt to keep it anonymous. I opt to just do the simplest little thing where I am not harvesting the full range of what it can provide. Now, I don't think I've had it not work for me now. I can't remember the last time it hasn't worked. But I work with a colleague who was, I had the first hour of the class and he had the second hour. And for some reason, when he transitioned, it didn't work. And we figured it out at the end of class. So then the next session, he's able to do it. Because you have to click all the right buttons to get it to work. So mine has been very smooth. It does take time during the class. But again, I've discovered through teaching that often less is more, and that anything you do that brings the student to the table, and the larger the number of students, the better. And I will say that some of my content questions, I have them periodically through, even just as an engagement where they have to stop reading the newspaper online and click an answer, right? It gives them a chance to come back to doing what we're doing. So all of my classes are not just polling question and discussion driven. It's usually a section of the class that I have allocated now for that time. And it's unpredictable, right? If they all choose not to say anything, then we'd be getting out early. But I don't think I've ever had that happen. In when I first get a cohort and begin working with them with polling, I learned way back in a Doctor of Arts class about wait time, right? Where you pose a question and I know I can wait longer in silence than they can. Somebody eventually feels compelled. So, so I think it's worth, I understand, I'm not surprised at all. It would be great if the technology wasn't so glitchy. I'm totally willing to go through the glitches to reap the benefits. And I would say find the simplest one that's fairly reliable, and then also work with colleagues who've used it before, if that helps. Michael?
Thank you, Nancy. That's really helpful.
You bet.
So I just have a question. I use Turning Point in my classes a little bit different than you do. Why do you choose for anonymity versus knowing the students' responses? Maybe not obviously projecting the students' responses in the class, but afterwards being able to see what students are maybe not grasping concepts. I'm just curious your thoughts there. I know with Turning Point, it takes a little bit of a extra step to get all that situated, but.
It does. And so I used to do that, and I used to track it. And what I discovered, it's been a while now, it might be important for me to start doing that again. So for the time and effort spent to get it set up and then to track it, I let that go as life became too busy, because what I've had are people coming to me before I have to go to them, which I think that's even better, right? So instead of me forcing my suggestions on them, saying, hey, I'm noticing this, and offering assistance when they're seeking me out. So I have let that go, because that made the technology so much harder and more time consuming to use. So much harder. So I would say, if you have the time and the interest, I think it's highly valuable. I think it would be a great thing. But when life gets busy, I just went to anonymous, and I tell them it's anonymous. And I don't know if that changes the results. There would be a great study, right, to compare what their engagement is, what they choose to do when we know who they are versus when we don't. So yeah, great question. Great question. So that's during class. And some of this I have already said, and I put this as a belief that I think not only just during class, but having been part of polling changes behavior outside of the class and in between classes. And I have it as a belief because I don't have data or evidence on this. That's another thing when life slows down a little bit that might be plausible, right? Start using this for education research, right? But I think anonymous polling provides that gentle feedback mechanism where a student can self-evaluate that no one knows they're the one, right, that answered so differently than everyone else. And it allows them that peer thing where they recognize they're not the same as their cohort. Polling results has aided students. Some have gained confidence. The ones who were quiet and were not seen as kind of leaders or sources in the classroom, through the polling, end up being more willing to speak up and then begin assisting others, and almost develop, in my opinion, a clinical savvy where they are catching the information in a case. Again, I'm using cases. You can use it with all sorts of things where it boosts that, oh my gosh, I got it. Oh my gosh, I got it. We do over 29 years, I've accumulated huge numbers of cases, right? A large number. So having the same course over time is beneficial, but it's interesting to watch transitions in the cohorts and how people interact due to the confidence that's gained. And then others have sought me out, and they have come to me. I don't know who they are, and they've come in and said, hey, I'm the one, right? That's me. And I'm recognizing I need to work on something. What can I do? That I build trust, right? That I build trust that these polls are not judgmental. This is not grade-based, right? Doesn't go into the grade book. And so it gives us opportunities to set meetings, to go through things, and to come up with some suggestions on how to improve their clinical decision-making, essentially. So options for polling platforms, I use Point Solutions, formerly Turning Point, but there are other ones: Swift, Go Soapbox, Poll Everywhere, Slide Lizard, Socrative. And Socrative, I believe, from the information briefly I saw, was primarily used in Europe or something like that. I'm not sure, so I'd have to go look. So recognize there's multiple platforms, and there's certainly options that are free versus paid. So many others. So again, I use polling because our department, the PT department, purchased a polling app annual subscriptions for all of the students for the 3 years they're in the program. And so it happens to be Point Solutions, Turning Point, and I place them in my PowerPoints, right? I have PowerPoints where I can put in a polling slide anywhere I'd like. You can even do it right during class if you want to. I usually don't use that option. And students can answer from wherever they're located. They could be attending through Zoom at home. They could be in Pocatello. They could be in Meridian. Wherever they are, they can contribute. I use it for periodic content questions. opinion questions, and patient case decisions. So it's almost like seeing a patient without a patient there. I personally do not use it for graded items. The technology for it to integrate with Moodle and the gradebook is all there. I have not used it for graded items, for quizzes, things like that. I do not track student attendance or performance through it. And I do not use it for competitions. And I think that's just fine. I just personally don't use it for that. So polling is different from Kahoot. So Kahoot is an online quizzing, timed competitive. It puts the people that are in the top 3 on a little platform at the end, right? And I've seen our cohorts engage in it and they love it, right? They are highly competitive, they're driven, they really, really enjoy the experience. Point solutions is very different. So questions posed through PowerPoint, it can be timed, but it's not required. It's less competitive. The correct answer is really not as important as why it was selected for a lot of how I use it. And I'm looking more for the discussion and the rationales. I'm not focused on points. I'm not focused on competition. Okay, can we do the Kahoot, the last polling slide, just to see if people are familiar with Kahoot? Wow, I'm surprised. I would have thought more people. So half of us haven't used it. How about that? So if you get a chance, you might check out Kahoot because it provides another very engaging learning opportunity. It's just different than polling because it is set up as a competitive quiz versus asking questions and getting feedback. So again, just polling is one option for engaging students and learning that gives you real-time results. It guides content delivery and where you're going to spend your time based upon the specific student's needs. The results can promote discussion for deeper learning. Again, if you have the time built into your course to be able to do that. And I've had success with a paid subscription, but recognize other options are available if your program or department doesn't have that financial opportunity. I did go to look to see what is out there, and there is literature about the use of polling options, and some, pro and some con, right? And it does seem that there's not tons, right? So it seems that's also an area, if you're interested in education research, that would be an option. And any questions, and at any time, feel free to contact me if you have any questions about polling or point solutions or how I use it. I'd be happy to discuss those with you. So any thoughts or discussion? Hopefully we're doing okay on time, or even with the delay in polling. Any thoughts or comments, questions? Michelle?
Thank you, Nancy, for your presentation. That was great. So one of the things that your presentation reminds me of is back in like the 1950s and 60s, B.F. Skinner designed a teaching machine that was for students to help them get immediate feedback on what they were learning and their performance. And so I think what's interesting is you're talking about this in terms of immediate feedback for the teacher, not just for the student, but I think both of those things are true, right? The student gets immediate feedback about where they are in learning. You get feedback about what you need to teach and so on. And so I was just kind of thinking of that sort of parallel as you were talking about some things. But then I was wondering about possibly another parallel. So I think in some of your research, some of what I know about, you have studied feedback. And so I'm just wondering, have you been inspired by your research with your teaching, or vice versa? Do those complement each other in any way in thinking about what feedback provides?
Absolutely, an astounding yes. I think I have had the most remarkable unplanned path where almost everything influences everything else. Because I do think I focus a lot on motor learning and how do you recover use of an arm after stroke or legs or whatever you're doing. And feedback drives everything. And I agree that it is cognitively and behaviorally. So the importance of feedback and how feedback is provided, right? And then the decisions you make to act on it, I think it's integral to everything. So yes, my driving questions in life, and probably one reason I do enjoy teaching so much is I don't think I will ever have it figured out. Now, no matter how many more decades I get to play and keep practicing, how do you structure opportunities where the people in a diverse group get the feedback they need in the way they need it to direct their next choice and behavior as they move forward? Totally all interacts. Like, that's a wonderful question. Thank you for putting it that way. And again, how unusual that physical therapy and biology, neuroanatomy, and experimental psychology, and my interests in neuroplasticity and pain and motor learning all come together, and cognitive learning. I have made that jump where I kind of approach it the same way as the motor learning. Thank you. Any other thoughts, comments, or questions?
So Nancy, I was just gonna say, I gotta run to teach, but so I actually have ideas how I can use it in my 10 o'clock class. You know, when I use polling, the Zoom, when we were teaching in political science, we were doing everything on Zoom there during the pandemic for a couple of semesters. And that was nice having that polling function, because it's really integrated well. And I did use it more during Zoom, but now you've given me ideas of how I can use it outside of Zoom in the classroom. So thanks. Some really good ideas.
Well, and Mark, it fits so well with what we just talked about in the book club on Wednesday, doesn't it? That deep learning, that the just right environment, how you engage students, and that curiosity, that it's really, that it fits with the book so well. I mean, I was getting so excited with the chapters and what we were reading and what we discussed on Wednesday. It just fits so well, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, curiosity. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great way to prompt curiosity. Yep.
So Nancy, I haven't used polling, and I was thinking throughout about the courses I teach, and when I teach literature, I frequently have my students, when we're working on some element of interpretation of a literary work, I often have them do in-class writings as part of what they do. And I think it's useful because they have to think about, you know, how do they interpret a particular action by a character, and they have to think through their rationale. They have to really come up with evidence for why they think what they do. And it's a really effective way to get them to take a moment and reflect. But it also takes a lot of time out of a class, and I have to read them all and I have to comment on all of them. And sometimes that's not a great use of my time. And so I do think, you know, polling would maybe get me there with, you know, multiple types of interpretive approaches for a certain element of a novel, for example, and then let us talk about it, and we'd get straight to it, because now they've got, like, they can see, well, you know, only half the class thinks what I do. So I'm going to argue more from my point of view. Whereas if I just ask the question, you know, in general, without a poll, I can see them just choosing not to respond at all. So I do think that even if you're not using it in a competitive way, there's something in most of us that will see that if it's not 100%, we want to back up our idea more actively. And that can actually have some benefit.
So you can see why I use the word compel. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And I think the other thing that you mentioned is, if you're reading all of them, it means the other students don't have access to what everyone else thought. And so selecting when to use class time to get that shared benefit versus the private evaluation of their interpretation. But yes, I think this fits across so many different disciplines to do the same thing. Yeah. Tony?
Yeah, so two questions. One of them, can we get your PowerPoint slides? There are a lot of things a lot of resources I'd like to come back and look at. The second one is, did you mention use in an asynchronous course? And how would you use that? Because that really got my attention for that purpose as well. This was an astounding presentation, by the way. And
Thank you.
can't wait to get the recording. I can hang on to that baby, but
Well, thank you.
yeah.
So my understanding is even the point solutions that we use works asynchronously, but I have personally never used it that way. I haven't had the opportunity to do so, but I suspect our attendees from ITRC and what they suggested works in Moodle would allow that. So the idea would be, I don't know how your asynchronous works and whether it's open for a week, but at the end of the week, you could have the results of the poll that then end up being fodder for that next week or something like that, that opens up that opportunity within the discussion forum or something like that. Just a thought. So I suspect if you have an idea, I would say go to ITRC. I did look at ITR's website and it doesn't look like ISU supports formal paid subscription to polling apps. So it would be, let's see how we can use what's available in Moodle to make that happen. If there aren't any other options, or maybe we could look and see if they'd be willing to look at what the free options are, and maybe we could develop some learning modules for those that are interested in doing so.
Thank you.
And I would love to hear back from anyone who gives it a try and see what you think. And I apologize in advance if it turns into a technology nightmare.
Thank you so much, Nancy. This is great.
You bet. Michael?
Yes, I love the idea. My hesitancy is I really hate it when anybody asks me to download a new app, and therefore I'm resistant to like invite students, hey, just download another app. I also don't like to, I don't want to have to, I don't like to collect students' personal information like phone numbers. I don't want them to have mine. I don't want me to have them. So like there's all these things that I think, I love the idea. I want to use polling in class. I don't want to invite them to take out their phones, and I don't want to ask them to download another app. But am I just shooting myself in the foot? Am I preventing myself from being able to do this?
I'd say no, because I think all of those things are important, and you have to, I think setting your parameters of what you're willing to engage in with technology is very, very important. But I'm thinking now you won't need an app if the Moodle feedback and other tool that was mentioned are available for that same purpose. So seeking out what is this technology solution for being able to attempt to reap the benefits without imposing these other components. And again, when our department started, we purchased student response devices and physically handed them to students, and then had a bag of them for when people forgot them, right? And I always carried a Ziploc bag full of batteries as well, right? So I think the main thing is, if you do think this is something that would be worth the time, the effort, and the value, let's find the solution that you can live with that doesn't require them to use an app. Our students have not had any issue. And again, we've paid for the subscription. We give them a little card. We do not collect their phone numbers, their personal information. I mean, whatever we have, sure we have FERPA information up the yin yang, right? But that doesn't come across in the polling. I'm not using anything like that. I don't know what Point Solutions gets when they scratch off their ID code and log in and form their account. I don't know what information they get from that, but that's a really good point.
Well, thank you, Nancy. This is absolutely wonderful. We will be posting the recording onto the PI website in the next couple of weeks. So if you want to rewatch and remind yourself of all these important and useful things that Nancy talked about, you can take a look pretty soon. I know I've got 3 pages of notes myself. So I've been busy. All right.
And thank you, everyone. You made this a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Thank you again, everybody. And we hope to see as many of you as possible at Spencer's presentation on October 12th. Thanks again.